Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. This is the e-commerce store part 2. In this tutorial we're going to implement Django GraphQL-jwt package, which is going to allow us to set up a JSON Web Token authentication system here with our front end and back end. And that's going to allow us to authenticate users from our front end, and we're going to be utilizing here or building towards creating a system where we're using HTTP-only cookies to store our JSON Web Tokens. So this tutorial has a number of different aspects. One of them also being we're going to try and set up React context so we can store information over a number of different components or pages. So the context is going to allow us to create a global context to store data and to pass it over to all the different templates and pages that we've created. And as we're going through this process, we'll also go through and refactor some of the code. So let's just go through a refresher here of what's going on. Here we're going to build in Next a page called login. That's going to capture the username and password of a user. We're then going to send that across to Django and generate a JSON Web Token. So at this point, we need to kind of decide where we want to store our web token, because what we're going to need when the token is sent back to our application, we're going to need that token every time we request any data from the server that requires authentication. So our token and any data that we request will come back to our application. And at this point, what we can do, one of the options, is that we can store this within our application and create a context so that that data can be accessible throughout our application in all of the components and pages that we have. Then the idea is to send the token with our request to Django. Django will then authenticate our token, collect the data that we've requested, and send it back to our application. And every time we then request any more data that requires authentication, we send along our token. So one of the perceived problems here of storing a token within our application is that it's accessible via JavaScript. So that potentially can cause security issues. So let's remember our token is being stored within our application somewhere, and we then request it through JavaScript so that we can send it across when we do request data. So the second option that we're going to go through here is to use cookies, HTTP-only cookies. So using a HTTP-only cookie, the setup is exactly the same. We're going to have a login page, send the username and password. Django is going to generate our JSON Web Token, but this time we're going to provide it instructions or set up Django to provide a cookie back to the browser. So a cookie, or the instructions to create a cookie, is going to be sent back to the browser, and then the browser will then generate a new cookie with the token that's been sent back via Django and flag it as HTTP only. And like I said, the idea here is that when it's flagged as HTTP only, it means that our application can't directly access the information. And like I said, that can help prevent certain security issues. So now when we send a request to Django requesting data that requires authentication, our application can't directly send our token. It needs to come from the browser, the cookie in the browser. So we just need to provide some additional instructions when we make the request so that the data in the cookie is also sent back with the request to Django, and then Django can then generate the data, authenticate and generate data and send data back. So just go ahead and access the first part 1 of the e-commerce store, and then the code is in the description here. I may have already put the code in the part 2 description, so if it isn't there, just go over to part 1, grab the code. This is the final code from the previous tutorial, and we're just then going to download that. So I'll make the assumption you know how to set up the Django application or set this up. Here I'm going to be utilizing Visual Studio Code, but I've downloaded this, put it into a new folder. I like to just extract this all out because this folder structure is way too long otherwise. Okay, so there's my project. So now I just need to open up a Visual Studio Code window. So there are two options here, obviously Django and Next in the folder that you've downloaded. So I want to first of all start with Django. So let's go ahead and go into that folder, select the folder, and then of course we're going to need to make our virtual machine. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I want to do is actually just go in and just strip out some of the files that we're not going to need, that for some reason have appeared or we started with, because we were trying to convert this from DRF, I think. So yeah, let's go in and do that first. So we just activate the virtual machine and let's go in. So this, before we install the requirements, don't install the requirements. This is what I want to first of all say. So let's go in first and go into the store. So we just tidy this up. So we're not going to need any of these views here, right? So let's just get rid of these views in the store, and then the URLs also. We're not going to need any of those. So let's get rid of those, and then the serializer can go because we're not using DRF, and the schema can stay. So that schema is all good. And we've got the models which are fine. And yeah, so that's the bit of tidying up that we're going to do here first. And like I said, what I want you to do is just delete the requirements. So let's just get rid of those, because there's a few other things there that we just don't need. So what you're going to need to do here is have a look at the repository for the requirements. I'm going to paste them in here. So this is what I've got here. So I am running, I think, Python 3.9. Let's just check that. So I'm running Python 3.9 so that you can align this up. Here you can see that we're going to be utilizing Django 3.1.7. That's not really a problem. And the CORS headers 3.7. Okay, so here's the important thing. So Django GraphQL-jwt. Here I'm running 0.3.1. So that's installed. So Graphene 2.1.8, that's important. But more importantly here is when you install Django GraphQL-jwt, by default it installs the latest version of a PyJWT. So PyJWT is utilized by the GraphQL-jwt to generate JWT tokens. And here you can see that, that I've moved this back to 1.7.1. So the latest version is 2.1, I think, or something like that. So 1.7.1 represents an earlier version before they jumped to 2.0. And it just happens that because the Django GraphQL-jwt hasn't been updated for quite a long time, it only really works with, only works by default, say, with Python PyJWT 1.7.1. So that's massively important that we have that in place, and why I'm asking you to copy this across and then to install from the requirements as it is here. So there's a number of issues. There is a later package, like a refresh package of GraphQL-jwt that's floating around, but out of the box, it doesn't work very well, or there's a few issues that's preventing it from utilizing PyJWT out of the box, say, on a fresh install. So this is what I found to be the winning setup here for now. Maybe in the future that would change. Hopefully at some point, maybe GraphQL will be updated again at some point. But that's what we're going for. So just double check and make sure you've got all those dependencies and those versions. So just copy them across from the repository folder, put them in your requirements, and then let's pip install them. Right, so once they've installed, let's go ahead and run the server, see if this works. Okay, so it should work. Right, so now that's all done, let's just go into the browser and just check this. So we go straight to the GraphQL, so GraphIQL is installed or by default here, or set up by default. We've defined it in the URL as active. So we've got this. So what we should be able to do now is let's just go ahead and see if we can run a query. You can see there's a number of queries that I've already run in my history. So let's just see if we can grab one. So query all products. Let's just go for that. ID See if this works. There we go. So now we can follow the Django GraphQL-jwt instructions here. So we've got it installed. The middleware is already added in the project by default. So what we need to do here is add the middleware, the JWT middleware, to Graphene. So that's the next step we need to take. So inside your project, let's just close this down. So let's go into the core here, settings. So at the bottom, we already have Graphene installed and set up. So we should already have a setting here for our schema, pointing our schema in the right place. So what we need to do now is, like it says here, we just need to add it into our project. Right, so let's go ahead and do this. So we need a comma. There we go. So our middleware is now installed. Right. So now we can define the authentication backends. So we want to define the GraphQL-jwt as the backend authentication method. So let's go ahead and do that. You can also see that we're going to be utilizing Django contrib auth backends model backend. So this, I guess, is going to provide us or allow us to still sign in as a administrator into the admin area, for example. So we can still utilize Django's authentication methods too. So we've got our backends now in place, and that's pretty much it at this point. So now we need to build a new schema for this. So if you're coming from DRF, you know that DRF has potentially multiple endpoints. So in our URLs, we would have multiple endpoints, which then allows us access to different data in our database, say. So here with GraphQL, generally we just have one entry point, and then we point that entry to a schema or a mutation, for example, and then we can run our queries and so on. So because we have this one entry point and then associated, associated schema, so we have a single schema we point to, we've got two options here. We can build everything from one schema, so put all of our queries on one schema. Now that doesn't necessarily make for good reading, because you might have multiple apps and this file might be quite long. So following the pattern that we set out or we utilize in Django, where we break down our components or applications into smaller chunks, we can also do this with the schema. So here what we can do is we can make a core schema, a main entry point. So inside of our core here, let's make a new file called schema.py. Okay, so that's going to be our main schema. Now we already have a schema inside of our store here. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Okay, so we already have a schema here. So the idea is that we want to make this core schema the main schema and then connect this schema to all the other schemas we have in our other applications. So now what we need to do is just point first of all to this new schema. So it's not in store anymore. It's in our core. So core is the app, schema is the file. Inside of schema will be a schema value, which will then point to the queries and mutations that we want to run. So now what we can do is just build up this core schema here. So it points to our store schema. And then any other schema we add to our application, we can just keep adding into our main core schema here to point it to those schemas. So what we're going to need here is Graphene, of course. So we're going to import Graphene, and we're also going to need to import. We're going to need to import the actual files, so the schema files from the other pages. So this is just like bringing in any other app you might do. So we just need to call it by its name and then the file. So we're going to bring that file in, the schema file from store, into this new core theme schema we're building here in our core app. Right, so now we've got it in. Obviously just make sure in the settings that you've added the app. So here we've got store here. So I'm not too sure why the REST framework's there actually. We can remove that. I'm surprised it didn't come up with an error because we didn't install it. So just remove that if you've got that there. So we've got store here, so let's go back to our core schema here. And now what we need to do is just set up our query. Of course, there's a little bit of a typo here. So just make sure you've got the store here, not account. So just like you do with a normal schema, you need to define the query set. So in this case, it's going to be store schema and then query. So let's go back into the store schema here. You can see that we've, at the bottom here, we've generated a new class called query. And then we're passing that in at the bottom here into schema equals graph.schema, the query equals query class. So that's the schema variable, say. We've put in this class query. So in our core here, you can see that we've gone into the store, we've gone into the file schema, and then inside of the schema, we're looking for the query class. So essentially here, we're just grabbing that class and then making it available here. So we're going to need the graphene object type. So that's just basically going to allow us to, like you've done here, the graphene object type is going to allow us to essentially grab our objects that we're generating the data from or describing the data. So that needs to be after, that's important, it needs to be after our schema, otherwise it won't work. So make sure graphene.object type is at the end here. Right, so that's our query. Obviously, if we wanted to grab anything else, we could just add a comma here and add another application, for example, and just extend like that. So that's how we're going to work here in this core schema here. So that's our query, and now we can just go ahead. If we had more, of course, we could do that. Now we can just go ahead and generate our schema. So schema equals, and then in this case, pointing to our class here. Right, so with that set, let's go ahead now and build a new app for an account. So we're going to build a new app called start app account. So here we're going to separate the logic for the account services and features that we're going to include. So inside of account here, we're going to need a new schema. So account referring to the user account. So we want to authenticate them. So let's put all the user authentication in this account app here. So we're going to need a new schema. And then if we go back now to here, we've got the setup now for our new schema. This is going to authenticate the user and generate tokens. So we can just utilize this now and put that into here. Okay, so now we've got this here. We now need to go back to our main schema and hook our main schema into this, this account schema here. So go back here. Now notice here that we're using mutation. So what we're going to need to do here is just extend this slightly. Mutation equals mutation. Mutation. There we go. And then create a new class for the mutation. And then same as we normally done here, but this time we're going to go to account dot schema dot mutation. And then we're going to need to bring in graphene.object type again. And then we just pass, there's nothing else we need to do there. Okay, so there we have our mutation now. So we're passing that in to our main schema. So we now have access to it. So hopefully you can see the flow here. So this is what we're now pointing GraphQL, or this is what we're now pointing to enter our system and to access all the other schemas that we have in our systems or our applications. So we've hooked up now all the schemas. So let's go back into our GraphQL here. Let's just refresh. And now hopefully we can use mutation. You can see here it's provided me the option, so it probably means that it works. And now we can try and log a user in. So we are given instructions on how to do that. So let's just go back to here. And I think it does. If you look through the documentation, it will then give you or provide you instructions on your first query in order to get the data. So here we are. So this is the mutation to get the token. So we're going to be using token auth. And you can see here we're going to pass in the username and password into the query, and then we're then going to collect some information. So by default here we can see that we collected token payload. That's going to provide the user that we're logged in as, and the refresh expires in. So that's going to tell you how long the token lasts for. So here we're just going to use a single token. So we do have something called refresh tokens as well. We're not going to implement that in this tutorial. So essentially here the token will have a very short lifespan. And then after a certain time, we're going to need to refresh it. So the refresh token is a longer span token, which allows us to kind of keep that stored in your browser maybe. And then when you go back to that page, we can use the refresh token to get a new token and then continue like that. So we're not going to implement refresh tokens here, like I said, but let's go ahead now and implement this here. So this is just really for when we implement it in Next.js. So this is the main component we're going to need. So let's go back here. So here we're going to need to do this manually, of course. So the username and password for my system is admin and admin. There we go. So let's just get a little bit of information. Let's just start off with the token. There we go. So we've now passed that across to Django. We've generated a new token. So that looks absolutely fine. So let's have a look at the payload. What happens when what we return there? So the payload here, you can see that we're returning essentially the admin name, and then a refresh. That just tells us when it expires. Okay, so we're collecting now information from the back end. Everything is successful and working. So important here, obviously, that you're using those requirements that I set out at the start of the tutorial. So now we can go one step further. Let's just go through the process of maybe authenticating a user. So what we can do here is we're going to need to use the request headers here, and inside of here we're going to need to set this up so that we pass over our token. So in our header then we're going to set up authorization. So authorization, and then we'll just need to send across our token. So here we're going to need a prefix of JWT and then the token. So let's just go ahead and grab this token and do that. There we go. Oh, what happened there? Okay, so now we've got that in place, we can now go ahead and use and try and grab some information about the user, for example. So let's go back into the account, and we're going to set up and expand this schema to collect information about the user. So the process here is very similar to what we've done before in the first tutorial. We're going to need a model to collect data from, so we'll bring that in. We're going to be utilizing the Django object type, just part of Graphene here, allows us to select and utilize Django models. And then also I'm going to bring in the declarator, GraphQL-jwt declarator called login required, so we can flag, utilizing the declarator, different functions that require logins in order to access that data. So that's one way of utilizing this. We can also use the manual way, so I'll show you the manual way as well. So let's come down here. We're going to need to build a new query from a model. So assuming you've seen the first tutorial, here we're going to set up a class called user type. We're going to grab the user data from the user model, and this is the data we're going to grab from our model, ID, username, and email. Remember, that's from the user model. This is the default Django user model. So that should be set now. So now we need to make a query for this. So let's add a query. So you can see here that we essentially we're bringing the user type data, and we're going to list that data, and then we're going to pass it over to this variable, which we're now going to use to resolve. So this basically collects the data and sets up the data. Now we need to collect that data, so we need to produce a resolve here. So to resolve that, we're going to call this user details. Maybe make sure that matches up, user details here. So inside of here, we're then going to run our query. So we want to return here, for example, the user objects.all. So we're just going to collect all the data from a database at this point, right? So we're going to collect all the user data. Now, obviously, we don't want anyone to collect all the user data. We only want an authenticated user to be able to do this. So here we can now authenticate. So what we're told is that the user in the middleware, so the JSON web token is authenticated in the middleware, and then the username is extracted and placed in info. So inside of info is the username of the user that you're currently logged in as, if you've sent a correct web token, JSON web token, over to the server. So what we can do here is we can say that in info, in the context, there's your username. So we can use that username to then authenticate you on the system. So we're saying here basically, if you're not authenticated, we're going to raise an exception. So let's check the user against if you're logged in or not. So if the user is not logged in, authenticated, then we're going to show them a message there. And if they are authenticated, well, we're going to just carry on and run our query. Right, so that's going to help protect. So like I said, we could just use the login required here, just use this declarator at the top here if we wanted to save us doing this. So there's two ways of checking for authentication here. Right, so with that in place, let's run the server again. Right, so let's go back to our front end IQL again. So let's now run a new query. Actually, apologies. So now we've got this new query here. We need to obviously set this up. So back in our schema, we need to say query. Actually, we don't need this, but I'll just do this anyway. So query. So normally we'd need to do that, right? But we're going to run this directly from the class. So go back into your core schema. Right. So we've got a query here. At the moment, we've got store. So now we need to bring in account. Oh, I just noticed. I'm not bringing in. So we need accounts here. Dot schema. And then dot query. Okay, so we're going to bring the query in from the account schema. And then we've got query down here, which is all good. So let's now go back to here and refresh. And then let's run a new query. There we go. So what was the query? It was user details. So that pretty much matches up to what we're doing here. So inside of our account schema, we've got user details here. So that's what we're asking for. So now we need to resolve information. We're going to send a query across and resolve it. So the query that we're going to run is we just want to get the ID and the username of the user we're currently logged in as. Remember, we were sending the request headers. So we're going to need to do that. So at the moment, you can see we get the message back, authentication credentials were not provided. So at the moment, we're not authenticating ourselves properly. So we're receiving this message here. So what we need to do now is go back a few steps, grab our token again. Let's just go through this again. Authorization. Let's just make sure that's like that. And then we need to send our JWT prefix and then the token. Okay, so as well as sending this query, we're also going to send our authentication method. So that's our token. So let's go back into here. Let's run our query again. So this is going to be the user details query. We're going to get the ID of the user and the username. Cool. Right. So we're going to send this across as well to authenticate. And there we go. So now I've authenticated myself with my token, and you can now see I'm returning back the data from a database. So there's no point us moving forward unless we've got this working. So I made a little bit of a mistake earlier. I do apologize. I'll just get into the moment. So in our schema here, I mentioned we're bringing in queries or mutations. So we don't need this schema option down the bottom here anymore. So we can, in the accounts and the store, apologies, I made a little mistake there. Like I said, I was just in the moment, so I don't need that. So let's go back and just test that out. And you can see it still works okay. So obviously we're just defining the schema and mutations in the core here. That's what we're pointing to our entry point, to our URL. That's kind of the entry schema into our system. And then we're obviously expanding to our other schemas. So another thing, it wasn't a little bit inconsistent. Just make sure that we're importing both the account and the store at the top here, in case you're having a problem. So make sure you've got those, the account and the store. And then of course in the settings in your core, just make sure that you've got store and account here registered. Otherwise that might cause a problem. And there we go. So now what we want to do is configure the server so it provides a cookie, a HTTP only cookie to the browser with the token inside of that cookie. So to do that, let's first of all just go into the settings of your Django project. I've just noticed 117 here. We can get rid of that line. So what we need to do here then is we need to access the URLs, and we need to now add on a new option here in our GraphQL. So if you go into the documentation, it does give you a kind of an initial introduction. So in order to get JWT cookie working, we need this new declarator, and then we're going to place it within our URL pattern here. So we can wrap this up with the CSRF exempt if we want to keep that in there for now. So we're going to use the JWT cookies, wrap this up with another. There we go. So now what's going to happen by default is going to return a JWT cookie, HTTP only. So you can now have a look if you want to, and have a look at the different settings that you can apply here. So go through the documentation, have a look at all the different settings that you might want to apply with this. But that's what we want to do in basic terms. So let's go back to our, let's go back here to our GraphQL. So here we're going to log in again. So let's go ahead and do that. And this time you will see in the application cookies here, a new cookie will appear. There we go. So by default, it's called JWT, the value here. So this is now my cookie that's HTTP only from the server. So what I can do now, in actual fact, I can remove the authorization here from the headers. And now when I make a request for user data again, so when I do run my query again, and I want to get the user details. So let's just get the user ID and the username. So when I run this again, this is going to be passed over to the server. And there we go. We're now authenticated and we received our data back from Django. So those are the two setups that you might want to include in your application. Now Django has been configured. We can now move to the front end and sort out Next.js to implement what we've just done here. So new Visual Studio window, go into the repository here. Here I'm going to go into Next.js this time and core, open that up. And then when you're ready, well, seems to be a few problems here. When you're ready, go ahead, and the first thing we need to do is install the packages. So npm install. So go ahead and run that. So that will install all the packages. And then by default, it should work okay. So npm runs dev. So that will start the application. So it should compile okay. And we'll just double check that. So that's localhost 3000. Yep. So that's all working. So there's no changes we made in Django which should affect the front end. So it should be working okay. So we're going to start off with a bit of folder management here. So pages is just going to be dedicated to the pages that we built. So index. Remember, these are ways of manipulating or wrapping around our different pages here, different components and aspects that we want to bring into each and every page. So that's app and document there. So you can see we've got the category and product pages. So API isn't really a page, for example. So let's just start to build a different structure here. So we've got components here, the individual components. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call that API. I'm going to call that app. Sorry. Inside of app, I'm then going to just drag the API folder inside of there. Okay, so that's my API folder now inside of here with the client. So inside of my API folder, I'm going to create a new file called authorization. So this is going to just deal with all the kind of authorization, API authorization that I need to build. Log in, log out, get username, and so on. So we'll just build that there for now. We're going to keep the Apollo client in place, and we'll continue using that. So we may have already messed up some of these pages here. So let's go in and have a look, see if there's any issues. So React should do a good job at renaming things when you do move files. So for example here, index, you can see that it's now found the new folder. Oh, it hasn't, of course. Doesn't look like it has. App API doesn't look like, but sometimes is the case. That is the case. So this is the index page now. Let's just go ahead and just rebuild this. should, it should cause an issue. Page cannot be found. So you can now see it says cannot resolve items. So now we need to just go ahead and go back a folder, and then inside the app folder, and then API client. So I think maybe that's the only change I need to do there. There we go. So I've just moved that folder around, and I've now directed the page back to the app API folder. You can see that we're going to need to make that change on all the pages. So let's go ahead and quickly do that. So in this page here, the client, in the category, there's only a few pages, so we may as well do it. And then of course, don't forget in the components and the header, that probably also need, no, we're good there, we're good there. So let's just double check this. Okay, so that's still not being found. So that was the product slug. So client. Okay, so we're in a new folder here, in the product folder. So in actual fact, we need to go back 2 folders to find that, and that will be the same for the category as well. Sorry. So you can see this is getting a bit cumbersome, so we could potentially change that in the future. So you can now see that's all working okay. And our home page. Okay, there we go. So I'm also going to move the components folder inside of app. So what I end up with is 2 main folders, one for my pages and one for my app. The rest here are just bits and bobs. Maybe I can also move the styles and SRC or so later in the app, but it just allows me to better manage my project, and we'll move this as we go along. So we've now got components here, so it's likely that I'm going to need to go now back into each page here and just make sure that the header is coming in from the right place. And you can see here what's happened is that it's actually changed the component for me, and so it looks like it's already done it for me. Yep, okay, so it looks like it's okay. If not, just manually go through and make sure that the header is now pointing into the right folder. So let's now go over to, actually let's just work out, there's a console log here in the terminal. So let's just quickly find that. That's a little bit annoying. So we're looking for console log. So it's either going to be in the index here. So there's one item here. There we go. So let's just get rid of that. Let's just double check the category. It looks like there's one there too. So this is where we were just testing our code in a previous tutorial. Let's just double check in the app header. There's one there too. Cool. Right, so that just gets rid of all those console logs. Again, it's not going to break the code if you haven't done that. So let's start fresh. And now we're ready to build a new page, the login page. So let's go ahead and create a new page. We're going to call this login. So this login page, how it's going to work is a classical login page in that there's a username and password. When the user types in something to the input field, we're going to save that in state so that we can then send that data across to login. So we're going to use the use state for that. So to confirm, input field, user types in username. As they type in, it saves it into a storage area, use state. And then when we're ready to press send, we'll take that data from that use state and then send it across to authenticate the user. So we're going to need a few different material UI components here. For example, a button, a text field, a link. So we'll build a link somewhere to link to another page maybe. A grid just to kind of organize and arrange our input or our form on the page. And then any styling we want to include. So make styles and then a container. Okay, so signing in then. So here we're going to bring in some styles if we connect this to styles. So we'll bring that in, use styles. And we'll connect that in a second if it doesn't make sense. So here we're going to create 2 states. So one for the username, so to store the username information. So here we got to collect the data from the state and then to set it into the state. So these two items here, we do the same thing with password. So that's how to collect the password from state, and this is how to set data in the state, set password. And then we're going to need a function for onSubmit. So when we press to submit our username and password, we're going to need to perform an action. So we'll ready that function, and then we're going to need a return. So here we're going to create a container with a max width of XS, so that's a small width container. And in here we're going to put our form. So that's a kind of a component that we're building for us to then export. So here we're going to, actually, we want to call that something else, don't we? So let's call this sign in, or login, sorry. So here we're going to export the function login. So inside of here is going to be whatever's here in our sign in right here. So we're going to basically just take this and put it right here, right? So now we can go ahead and just fill in our container with a form. So we're just going to use a pre-created form here. So in Material UI, get started, we've got the templates, and here you can see we've got this sign-in template. So we're just going to utilize this sign-in template for now, and then in the later tutorial we'll go through styling it. So to grab that data, you just need to look at the source code and then just go to sign in here, and you can see that we're going to need this style up here and then whatever's inside of this container here. So let's just grab this code and put it into our page. So from there I've just copied form to form. So that's pretty much what I've done. I've made a few changes already. So you can see this form here has a class of form. So we're going to need to bring in our styles in a second, our classes here. So we're going to need to bring our styles a second. So onSubmit equals onSubmit. So we're going to run this function here called onSubmit. That's how it's all tied up. And you can see here we've got a text field here for the username. Now importantly here, when the user types in anything, we're going to update the state. So to do that, set username. This is how we update whatever's inside of this state here for the username. So every time we type in something on change, it's going to update that, whether we delete items or add items. So we do the same thing again here for the password. So make sure you've got the labels and the IDs correctly set up. On change, this time we're going to run set password, which you can see here. This is how we kind of add items to this state here. Okay, so in addition to that, we've got a button at the end here to sign in. And we've got a class again for that. And then at the bottom here, just a simple grid with forgot password, don't have an account, sign up. And of course, you can just change and add or delete whatever you need there. So now we've got that in place, let's just bring in our styles. So we keep mentioning styles. So I'm just going to again copy and paste this from the Material UI website. So this is the theme. So remember here we're using make styles. So we're just extending from our theme styles here essentially as well. You bring in all that in. So we're using make styles to build this theme here, so then we can then bring it in here. So we're attaching all this code here to here, classes, and then we're then utilizing it through classes.form. So that's kind of like the flow there of how to get to this styling here. All right, so I don't need to go over the styling. In actual fact, I don't think I'm using the avatar, so I can get rid of that. Right, so now we've got that in place, the page should load. I say that. Let's go and have a look. So login, that's the page. That's what we've called it. And there we go. So we've got a simple login form. So now we can try and attach this now to Django so that we can authenticate a user. So now we need to deal with the functionality to authorize the user, and also we need to design and build other authentication functions. So for example, on pages, we want to maybe check to see if the user is logged in or not. Now remember, this is stateless, which essentially means that we're going to send something to Django and they're going to send something back, and they don't know anything about each other other than it knows to collect information from each other and then to deal with it. But apart from that, there's no real other connection. So the only way to know in Next if we're logged in or not is if we actually log in and then perform an action and maybe create a variable or a Boolean somewhere to say that you are now logged in and storing it. So maybe we make a Boolean signed in equals yes or true, sorry. And that's stored somewhere in the system. So if any time we want to check to see if the user's logged in, so a good example here would be if we wanted to make a button that says logged in. If the user is logged in, we want to check that they are logged in and change that button to log out, for example. So it's those type of functions that we're going to need to build, as well as actually signing in the user and sending that across to Django and so on in here. So let's start off then by building a function called user authentication. Right, so we're now going to need to build a state, for example. So we're going to need to build a storage area so we can store the authentication token and maybe, for example, the username. So our system is going to hold the user's username throughout the whole system so that we can access it whenever we need it. Maybe in the header we want to say welcome X, Y, and Z, whatever their name is, etc. Okay, so let's set this up. So we've got two states here. Now what we want is we want to make this available throughout our whole application. So that's important. We want to make this available through our whole application. So we're going to need to build a context. So here in React, we can use create context to build a context, and then we can specify what we want in that context. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to make this data available throughout our whole application stack. So at any point in time, if, for example, we're in index, we want to easily be able to access maybe the username so that we can check to see who what the username is of that user that's currently logged in. And then also we can then save the auth token. Maybe we want to use that token to manually make a request, like I showed you earlier in Django's to make a request. Now, of course, you might not want to save that at all. That's not a problem at all. This is just an example of how to now set up a use the create context in React to kind of share this data easily and pass it down to all these components should they want to utilize it. So let's start to build and to bring in some tools. So there's three tools here that we're going to need to bring in. Use state, you've seen it here. So we're using use state, use context, excuse me, and create context. So in order for us to build this context, remember, so context is basically, think of it as a variable. Inside of that variable is going to be all of this stuff that's saved. And we're going to pass that variable down into these other components so that we can access this data here throughout our application. So I've just seen why this is all underlined, etc. Because I've named the file pi. So I was in Django mode then. So it's a JavaScript file. Apologies. Right, so we've got that in place. So we're going to first of all create a new context. So let's just call this auth context, authentication context, right? So we created a context. So we're eventually going to store this inside of here, say. Right, so let's now produce or create a provider. So the idea now is that we want to be able to pass this down into these other components. So here we're going to provide or create some providers. So we're going to create a new function, which we're going to use in a second in the app.js. Okay, so we create this new function. It's called auth provider because it's going to be a provider. And what we want to return is a way of providing this function here. Right, so let's first of all we're going to bring in these tools. So this is called const user authentication. So let's auth equals user authentication. There we go. Okay, so we're going to bring in this function, and now what we want to do is we want to pass this down into the other applications, into the other templates, or components. So let's start by building this. So auth context provider. So this is our provider here. There we go. And let's specify children here. So this children is representing, in this case, it's just representing any other template or component that's inside of our application. So what we're doing here is we're wrapping. You can see that this auth hit value is being connected here, and this is then be connected to the user authentication. So apologies if I'm embellishing this. So I'm going to create a context, bam, and then I'm going to call it auth context. Right, you can see here that I utilize it here, auth context.provider. So I'm going to create a provider. I'll explain that in a second. Then the value is going to be auth. So we know that the value auth then is connected to this function here, which is this data here. So this data gets passed in here into auth and then gets passed over via our provider into the children, which eventually will be any of these these pages or components that we utilize. So hopefully you can kind of see the flow. It's not so intuitive as it could be, but hopefully you kind of get the idea of what's going on there. So now what we need to do is we need to take this provider and wrap it around our components. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside of our app here, underscore app, you can see that we've already got some other providers here. We've got a theme provider that's providing us the styles and themes that we're setting up for Material UI. So you can see that these wrappers are wrapped around this component here, and this component represents, say, any of these other components that we have here, or the pages, etc. So we're wrapping this data around our component, which means that when we're inside of this component, we can access any of these other providers, this other information that's stored somewhere. So we're passing down data from the theme provider into the component. And you can see that we already use this. So here, for example, make styles. We're kind of bringing that in. That allows us to access theme in our page. So anyway, let's get back to the app. So what we want to do now is we want to bring in our provider. Let's just close everything down here because it gets a bit busy. So we've got the app here and authorization. So we want to bring now that into our app so we can access it. So let's go ahead and do that. So just remind ourselves what this is called. So the function is called auth provider. So we need to bring that in. So let's do import auth provider. And that's going to be from, where are we now? So we just need to work out where we are, pages. So we need to go out of pages and then go into our app and then API and then authorization. So that's where it is. So now we've got that available. We can now use that to wrap around our component. So let's do that here. Ooh. Okay. Auth provider. Not too sure what happened there. So we can now wrap this around our component. And that will then be kind of connected to our component, and we can now access this. Okay, so that's the auth provider. So hopefully that provides some kind of explanation of what's happening here. Again, it's a little bit tricky to follow potentially if you're new to React and utilizing providers, but we're passing down this data. Now, in order to access this data, typically what we're going to need is a way of doing that. So we can do that by utilizing use context. So you can see here, create context and use context. So we want to use, in this case, the context that we want to use is auth context. And remember, this is all connected to this here, which is connected to this function. So what we can do, instead of writing this on every single page, we can just build our use context here. So export use auth. So we're going to export this as use authentication. So use authentication. That's how we're going to export it. And then we're going to say return use context. So we're going to use a use context, and that's going to be called the auth context. So that's connected right here. So what we're doing here, when we go to another page, and we'll see this in use in a minute, when we go to another page, we'll be able to call this here, and that will allow us then to use this context and then access all of this function here. So we're going to expand these functions here and include other functions, and we'll be able to kind of hook into those functions. So let's just put that at the top here. Okay, so we'll see that in action shortly. So let's just continue now and build our first function, which is obviously signing in. So if you remember, when we sign in, we're going to need to pass over the username and password. So we pass that into sign in here, username and password. And we're going to need to, in order to send this data, we're going to need an Apollo client of some sort. So let's go ahead and build an Apollo client. And then we're going to need a result, right? So we're going to need to actually then send this or a query. So let's do that. So here we're going to collect the result in result. So we're going to get the data. So we're passing in the username and password. We're going to set up the Apollo client so we can send a query. And then here we're going to actually send the query client.mutate. And then we're going to run the mutation, log your mutation. So that's the mutation that we generated earlier. We're going to run that. And then we're going to pass in the variables username and password into this mutation. Right, so far what we've been doing in, for example, the index page, we've been using all the queries on page here. So what we can now do is think about extracting these into a separate page. So in API, I'm going to create a new query, a new page here called GraphQL, for example. And then inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the query that we needed in order to log in. So if you remember, we needed to pass in the username and the password in order to run the token auth with username and password. So obviously what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be passing in the variables into this mutation. This is the what we're looking at here, the query here. So what I need to do now I've got this page, is I need to kind of import this in to my page. So if I go back to authorization, go up to the top here, what I can now do is kind of import that in. So it's right next to it. So in this case, I just need to use the .graphql. So let's bring that in. So I brought in that query into this page, and you can see that I'm going to be running it there. So that's what's happening now. So I'm going to be utilizing this. I'm going to export all of these different queries and mutations I have in all these pages in a short while, and place them all in this file here. And that's going to allow me to look at them, maybe see where I can amalgamate some of them, because I've probably got a lot of very similar queries that I'm running. So you may not want to do it this way. You may want to kind of separate these into your different pages, etc. Maybe you're using components, so the component will be the home page component, and then put it into there, etc. Yeah, at the moment, I'm just going to put it all in this GraphQL.js file, all of the different queries. So now I've got that, bringing that in. I'm now going to run the Apollo client. Okay. So next up then, I've got my result, which I'm just going to call data, I think, for now. So data equals, we're going to send off the client, use the Apollo client to send off the query. So we're going to need a result. Right, so this result, let's go down. So here then, when we return data, we're going to capture it here. So this is going to be data now. Let's go with data. So we return the data from the server in data, and then basically we're going to look inside of it. So data, inside of that, look for an item called data, and then inside of that should be token auth, and then inside of that should be some data where the token is stored. So we'll do a console log in a minute. We'll have a look at that data, and then you can see what we're doing here is we're going to get our state set auth token up here, and we're going to basically store the token inside of our state there. In addition to that, what we can also do just for now is we could use local storage to also store our data. So let's just change that to data. Okay, so we can also save it in local state if we wanted to, or we could make our own cookie at this point if we wanted to and store it there. So once we've done that, we could also push them to a separate page. I'm just going to comment that out for now because we don't want to move them anywhere. So in the previous tutorials, we have, for example, utilized this Apollo client here on all the pages. The idea is that we reuse this, and that's all great. So I just wanted to show you a different way of working here. So in authorization, I'm going to just define a new client. So similar to what we've done before, So above here then, I'm just going to create this new function called create Apollo client, and you can see that I'm basically utilizing that to run this query to log users in. And that'll make a little bit more sense in a minute why I'm doing that. I'm not using that. I just wanted to show you something very in particular in a minute, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a provider for the Apollo client. So I'm going to pass that down to different pages and use another tool in React so I can quickly run queries on whatever component that I'm using. So I'm going to show you that in a second. So yep, so we've got this Apollo client now. It's directed in the right place. Now importantly here, if you want to use cookies, and we're going to need to use credentials include. So I'll explain that in more details in a minute, but that's why that's there. Otherwise, everything else is similar to what we've already utilized. Okay, so we're going to need to bring a few tools in because we're using the Apollo client here. So let's just import that in. So provider, we're going to use shortly, Apollo client, in memory, and HTTP link. Right, so those are resources that we're going to need to run that query down here. So next up, I think we're ready. I think we're ready to run a login. So let's give this a go. Now, what we're going to need to do here, notice that this isn't being utilized, because what we're going to need to do is run a return. So obviously what we're doing here, remember we're passing this function into our context. So we're going to need to return so that we can access our functions here. So let's do a return right here. So at the moment, we're only using sign in. So let's just use that for now. Okay, so we can access sign in from here. Okay, so let's now go into the login page, and we're going to access our context via this here, and then we will then run the login. So let's go back into login. So first of all, in login, we're going to need to bring that in. So import. So we're going to import from. So it's just goes working out where we are and where we need to get to. So we need to get to authorization. So dash and app API and then authorization. So inside of here, we want to grab the use authorization. So let's do that. So that's going to initiate the context. So now I can utilize this here to now go into the context and access some of these other functions here that we have inside. So one of them being, for example, sign in. So let's move down to our signing. So we're on submit. We want to do something now. So first of all, we are going to need to, well, let's just bring in sign in. It's called small sign in. Yep, so let's bring sign in. I don't think that's right. I think it's a lowercase there. Equals and then use authentication. Okay, so let's just double check. It's called lowercase. Right, so we bring that in, bring that function in. So now what we can do is we can pass over to it the username and password. Bam, just like that. So what's happening now is when we press submit, on submit, it puts the data of the username and the password. Remember, that's coming from our state. Yep. So we're typing into the input here. That's being passed into our state here. And now we're going to, when we press submit, take that data from here, utilizing username and password. And then we're going to pass it over to this new function called sign in, which we've collected, if you remember, from our context here. Okay, so there's a lot going on, and we're moving backwards up to here. This is the signing. So you can see that we're now in this function. We're going to pass in the username and the password. That's going to then be used as the variables so that we can then fire off this mutation and check against the Django database whether the username and password exists. At that point, it will then send us a JWT token, and then we're logged in. So let's go ahead and put a console log here. So this is when we return data. So console log, and then let's put the data inside of here. That's the data that's being returned. So we'll take a look at that when it is returned. So let's go back into our page, and we're going to go to login. Now there seems to be an internal error, which seems a bit strange. So let's just restart this. Because we've made so many changes, we just need to restart, and that's probably going to give us a little bit more diagnostic information rather than internal server error. Or not, of course. So let's just go back to our home page. Are we looking on the right page? Okay. Okay, so here we go. GQL is not defined in GraphQL. Oh, okay. Right, so because I'm using GQL here on my, this is the API GraphQL page, that's obviously an issue. So let's just bring that in. So that's going to be imported from Apollo client. Okay, now what we have, so compiled successfully. Okay, we have a login page. So let's go to our login page. Let's give this a go. There we go. So failed to fetch. Okay, so let's have a look at why that is. So if I go and press F12, go into my network, let's just clear that and try again. You can see here that it says GraphQL. That's what I'm trying to access. Excuse me. Let me do it again. Or not. Let's do it again. There we go. So you can see here that it says GraphQL CORS error. So let's have a look at solving this problem. If you're not familiar with CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, have a look and read of this. This is very useful. Identifies and explains what this means. So essentially what's happening here, in short, is that this is our origin, localhost. So when we send a request, we normally add the origin into our request. Now, the server can see that localhost isn't the same origin as the Django host. So the Django machine, Django application knows that we're trying to send a message, or we're trying to retrieve data from Django utilizing a different origin. So for security reasons, what you don't want potentially is anyone from any origin, any web page, any resource, anywhere around the world accessing your API. So the idea is with CORS is it allows you to set up to allow other resources or locations to access your server. That's essentially what CORS is doing. So we cross-origin, as it suggests, cross-origin resource sharing. So other origins that don't reside on the same domain as your Django server, for example. So we're going to need to set up CORS to allow us to share resources across domains. Now, this is what I'm recommending at this point. So what I recommend you do is just terminate your Next.js application, and we're going to run this on the same IP address as the server, which is the 127. So to do that, we're going to run npm and then run dev, and then the double dash, and then we need to host. So we're going to say the host then is 127.0.0.1 colon, oh sorry, and then the port is a lower p, so H is capital for host and P for port is lower, 8001. So let's just see if we can run this on a different port. So that looks like it's working. So now we can access our application through this here. So let's do that. Okay, so /login. So let's just see if there's been any changes. So now we're technically on the same origin, maybe because we're on the 127. So let's sign in. And you can see here that we're still failing to fetch. Now, it still says that there is a potential issue. Okay, response. So let's just take a look and see what the problem is. So you can see through the console here that we still cannot access because the origin has been blocked. So thinking about this at kind of a high level, although we're still using 127.0.0.1, which is the same type of origin as the server, remember, is using port 8000 and not 8001. So here we can say that essentially this site is still on a different origin. So we're going to need to set up CORS on Django to allow access to this origin here. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you followed the requirements earlier, you've already installed Django core headers. So if you haven't, just go ahead and install this version 3.7.1 just to kind of match up the project if you haven't already got this. So once that's installed, we need to kind of configure it. So just go into the settings file. You're going to need to add it here to your installed apps. And then it has a little bit of middleware. So make sure that's in the third option down. It needs to be higher than the common middleware and the authentication middleware. So just make sure that is there, a third one down. So that's important. Remember the middleware, how it essentially works is that it works from top to bottom when the data comes in, and when the data goes out, it goes from bottom to top. Right, so move down to the bottom here. There's a few settings that we're going to need to configure. So the first thing with CORS, we can just define, for example, the allowed origins. So here I've allowed the origin 127.0.0.1.8001, which is obviously our next server. So that's allowed. So we can continue and add some different options here. So for example, there's parts of the headers that we want to expose. So if we're sending authorization in the headers, we can allow that, for example, in content type. So those are the settings that we configured, but we'll do that in a minute. So let's just remove that for now. So as long as you've got your core allowed origins, let's have a go now and see if we can actually connect. So I've got admin. I go to sign in, and has been blocked. So let's just refresh this. Okay, admin sign in. Okay, so we failed to fetch. It says post failed. Let's go up a little bit. So we still are getting this issue here. It says here access control allow credentials header in response is nothing, which must be true when request credentials include mode is include. So what we're going to need to do here then is just put this setting back in Django. So let's go ahead and let's do this. So let's just go for expose headers first. Okay, so let's just expose headers. So that's the items in the header that we're exposing, allowing across potentially. So let's just refresh and let's go to admin, sign in again. We're still getting a problem. Okay, so we're still in block. So access control allow credentials. So you can see here now, because remember we're trying to send back a cookie, aren't we, from the server? That's the setup. So potentially what we're going to need to do is allow credentials. So the setting that we're going to need to configure is the core allow credentials true. So we need to make sure this is on to allow to send cookies back and forward from our server for these allowed origins. So let's go back again. Let's refresh one more time, and then admin, and there we go. So now it's working. So we've got our data. That's what's being returned. So you can see here we've got our auth token, and that's all at the moment is our auth token. So let's just quickly change the setup. That's Django. Let's just quickly change our token, because if you remember what we could also include here, if you go back to the IQL, we can also include the, have it somewhere, yeah, the payload. There we go. So the payload is another option that we can send. That will allow us to get the username back. So let's just add that in, payload. So this time we'll just log in again and get the payload this time. So this time our data now includes token and also the payload here, which is the username admin. So let's remember this is in data token auth payload username. Okay, data token auth payload username. Right, so what we can now do very quickly then is we'll just grab this. Apologies, there's lots flicking over here. So back in Next. So let's just go over into the authorization here. Let's just see if we can collect this information as well. So this is set username. So remember it's in data.data.token auth, and then dot, and then it was and then was somewhere else. So if you're not too sure, you can just head back to IQL because it shows the structure, token auth, and then payload, and then username. So by all means utilize that. So token auth payload dot username. So that should drill down to the username and set our username. So let's go back into our login. Apologies, there's a lot of flicking over here. Let's admin, and there we go. So if it wasn't working, if it wasn't collecting the data, an error would be provided. So we're collecting now the username as well. So what can we do now? So now we've logged in, let's just head over to, for example, the application here. You can see that our JWT token is also being provided as HTTP only. So in actual fact, that's already set up too as well. So what we now need to do is make our dashboard and collect some information and check to see if our token is actually being utilized and sent across automatically. So our cookie is sent across automatically when we try to get any kind of sensitive data from our database. So in previous steps, what we've done in the index, for example, is that we've created an Apollo client here. We brought the Apollo client in, and then we've utilized that to run a query. We put the queries here, and then we've run them down. We've run them somewhere. So we've run them, and we've run the query, and we've got the query and the client in the same place. We're running the query like this. So what we can do in React is we can make the Apollo client part of the context and pass that down. So in actual fact, we don't need to call client every time. We can simply just ask React to utilize the Apollo, which is going to be in the context, to run a query. So going back to authorization at the top here, we're now going to make the Apollo client part of the context and pass that down to all the different components. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got our, let's remember we've got our function here, create Apollo client. That holds the client and all the details about building a connection to the server. So let's go ahead now and build a new provider. So we're going to be calling this Apollo provider. Okay, so pass into that. So Apollo provider, that's going to be Apollo provider there. Okay, so pass that in. And yeah, that's it. Okay, right, so let's just get rid of that. There we go. So we're now also providing so the Apollo provider and obviously the client details. So now we're passing that across over to the context, so it's available on every page. We can now use a React tool to run a query really easily. So let's build a new page. Let's call this dashboard. Of course, that didn't work. New file, dashboard. So what we're going to do is send the user to the dashboard when they log in. So let's go back into the, first of all, the authorization. Let's go back down. So we're going to use a router to push them to the dashboard. So we're going to need to bring that in from the Next tools. So here's a simple kind of redirect. Right, there we go. So that's the redirect. So now we're going to be redirected to the dashboard. So inside of the dashboard, we're just going to now collect information. Now remember, before we created in Django, we created in our account schema, we created a simple query here, which we could collect information about the user. So we're going to now query that to get information about the user on the dashboard page. And obviously you're going to need to be authenticated in order to do that. So in our dashboard, we're going to bring in use query, which is a great tool. Now we have the Apollo client in the context. We can use use query. So that's basically going to run a query based upon the client that we've kind of saved in the state, because we've created that provider previously. So what we can now do is a function, and then we can then use query, use this tool to run a query. So you can see what we can return is data and loading. So by using use query, this is a really good tool in that, for example, if the page is loading, because all queries with Apollo are asynchronous. So basically, if it's not connected yet and we're still waiting for the data, loading is going to appear. So what we can now do, for example, I say it very loosely, apologies. So is just a statement. So if loading, we're going to show something different. So let's just return, for example, let's just return something simple, like a page loading. So if the data hasn't been collected yet, we're just going to return that. Right, so obviously, if else, we're just basically going to return something else. So return. So if the page has, or we have collected all the data, we're going to return something slightly different. So let's do that. So let's get how are you doing? And then let's just go into the data. That's the data that's being returned. And then user details. That's going to be the query that we're running. And inside the user details, we should have maybe a few different rows. If we're collecting all the information, which we are at the moment, let's just select the first row and then just grab the username. How are you doing? And then the username. So that's going to print out the username of the user. So now what we need to do is we need to hook into our new our query. So we're going to need to build this. So this is from. So where are we now? So we're in the dashboard. We need to go out of the pages folder, into the app, into API, and then GraphQL. So we're going to need a new query called user details in GraphQL. So that is basically the same as what we've been using previously. So let's just build that. There we go. So user details, ID, username, and email. So we'll grab those details. So that's the same as what we've been utilizing again. And we've already tested it. This is a good test base. Here, the user details, ID, username. So that's all good. Right, so now we've got that in place. Let's go back here. We do have a problem here. I've renamed this incorrectly. So let's just double check that. So the problem being here is that we just need to return it. So we're not returning it yet. So let's return it so we have access to it because we're requesting it. Okay, so now we should be able to log in. So let's do admin, let's sign in. That should take us to the dashboard and a data breach. Yep, okay, so the default export is not a React component. Okay, so let's go back. Let's just make sure that we export this. Okay, let's go back into our page, and there we go. So you can already see it's using the name. So it's already working. So we have our JSON web token, HttpOnly, and we also now have selected information from a database as an authorized user, and we return back how are you doing, and then the word admin, which is obviously the name of the user. So let's go back into Django. So in the schema account, you can see that we were collecting all the information before. Now I've changed it here, so yours is slightly different. So we were collecting all the information. So now we can, for example, get just the user based upon the user that signed in. Now here we're using list. So we're resolving this user details here, using this resolver here, collecting the data, but we're using a list. So here, in actual fact, we probably want to return a field and not a list of data. So you'll receive an error because we're only receiving one piece of data. What we're returning now is just a field rather than a list of information. So when you go back into your dashboard now and refresh, you can see the data that's being returned is user details and then just one item. So instead of an array now, it's just one item with username, the ID and email. So that collects that information. So this is what the code looks like here. So data, username, email. So we were testing the data just here with this console log. So I can remove that now. Let's go back into authorization. So we're collecting the data. Okay, so that pretty much is the start of the system here. We've now started collecting information. We've authenticated the user. We're using JWT tokens, HttpOnly JWT tokens, to secure the user. Notice that we're not trying to, like I've said before, sending anything over. Everything's happening because we're using a cookie. Now, a few things to point out here, which I mentioned earlier. So inside of our authorization here, we're utilizing this client here, and it's important to make sure that we've got credentials include. So this basically tells the browser to also send the cookie, HTTP only cookie, over to the server when we make a request. If that isn't there, the HTTP only cookie will not work. Okay, so let's go back to this state because we're not using it yet. We set it up, but we're not actually using it. So let me just show you what's happening here. And so let's, for example, just make a simple is signed in function. So like I said before, this is all stateless. So it means that the Next.js doesn't know whether you're logged in or not unless you tell it is, because it doesn't have any connectivity to Django at all. So let's just build a is signed in. All right, so is signed in. So basically, if there is an auth token, so we're going to check. Remember what's happening when we log in. We set the username and the token inside of our state here. So let's just check this. So if the author token, so if there is an author token that's been set, we're going to return true, and that's going to tell us whether the user is signed in or not. Okay, so else we return false. So let's now utilize this. So we're going to need to return this, and what we can now do is utilize this, for example, on our dashboard or anywhere in actual fact, to perform some sort of functionality. So let's bring it in. We need to import this in. So import. Now this is only accessible because we have created a provider and we're passing it into all the components. So this is going to be from authorization. So we're in dashboard, so we need to go out of this folder, the pages folder, into app, and then API, and then authorization. So we're going to need to activate it first, remember. So we're going to need to bring in our, wherever it is at the top here, use authentication. So that's going to basically activate use context. It's going to activate the context and make it available. So let's go back into our dashboard here. Okay, so now we want to extract from here. So let's extract from here. This is the user auth. We want to extract is signed in. Okay, so that's a function. Okay, so we extracted out, and let's just use this. So now we brought that in, we can now check to see if the user is signed in or not. So let's bring it in up here. We're just going to call this new function called check. So we'll build a new function called check, and then we're going to use is signed in. So that's going to be a Boolean true or false. If it's true, then we're going to run this return, which is you are signed in. There we go. So let's give that a go. Go back to the dashboard here, and nothing was returned. Okay, so let's go to login. There we go, you are signed in. So it looks like we've signed in. Okay, so now that's all in place. Let's go back to the index here, because we were going to remove all of these items here, all of these queries, sorry. So let's just go ahead and quickly do that. Now, what I'm going to do is, I've already set this out, so I'm just going to paste all this in into the queries here. So I'm going to quickly remove all the queries from all the other pages and put them here. So we've got the products by category, single product query, and also the all products query, as well as the all category query. We've got the user details and the login. So those are all the queries that we've generated and created so far. So I've just extracted those from all the different pages. So now we need to go into the pages and just set it up to allow us access to those. So it's a simple case of just going through the same process on each one. So the index, we're going to need to bring in the queries. So in this case, all cat queries, all category query, and then the all product query. And then at the bottom, what we need to do now is just tidy this up. So instead of having these two big queries, obviously the queries are now being brought in. So what we can now do is run, for example, grab the Apollo client, new Apollo client. So let's just make sure that that's brought in. So let's just go to the top here. So that is the new Apollo client is here. Sorry, we sorry, we export it as client. So let's just change that to new Apollo client. So the default export is client. So let's move that to new Apollo client. So we're going to call that new Apollo client. Okay, so with that in place, let's go into the index here. So we're going to need to just bring that in. So that's going to be the new Apollo client from the Apollo client file. So bring that in. So just remember to go back one and then into the app API Apollo client. So now we can bring that in down here. The client equals new Apollo client. And then we can run our queries. So the difference here now, I've just set it out like this, of course. You can change that. So the data now is in query 1 and 2, data all products category. So let's just go ahead and see if that works. New Apollo client. So object is not a function. Okay. So let's go back into our Apollo client. So you can see here, we need to make a little bit of a change to put this into a function. So what I recommend here is this. So we're going to bring in Apollo client in memory cache, create HTTP link. And so here we've got our function new Apollo client. We've got our link. So here we're just separating things up by using HTTP link here. We've separated our link. And you can now see we're going to build our client using the link, cache and credentials. We use that too. So here you can see we kind of started to modularize this a little bit more by bringing a HTTP link, because we could add things in later if we wanted to, pass things in and add things to it. So this is just a more modular way of working with Apollo client and provides a little bit more flexibility. So going back now to the page, you can see everything is loading okay. So that's the index page. So I'm just going to finish off now by going into the products slug. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing at this point. So I need to bring in my two things I'm going to need here. So I can remove these two, bring in my queries for this and the Apollo client. And at the bottom here, I'm just going to replace all this code to just cut down on the amount of code that's at the bottom here. So bring in my client first. So let's just get rid of these and this here. So let's just bring in my client and query number 1, which is the all categories. And then we're going to, similar to what we've done before, we've got the slug here, query number 2, which is going to be the single product. And the variable here is going to be the slug from the URL. And then, of course, we just need to pass that into our props. So we can put it into our page. There we go. And that's that page done. So we're going to do the category page, exactly the same process. So we are slowly upgrading this code, make it more efficient. So back down here, let's just get rid of what we got here. Okay, so same problem again, or same process again. We've got the two queries that we want to run and the Apollo client. So the first is all good. Now you can already see that this is being replicated many times. So I'll leave it in your capable hands of thinking about how you can run this query on the header rather than running it every single time on the page. So that would be a fairly useful thing for us to do. So the second query here, get product by category, the variable being the name from the slug. And then of course the last thing then is just to update our props and then go back to our page, have a look. So this is the home page. That takes us to the single page. This is the category page. And then we can click on individual categories. That takes us to the individual page again. And we've got the home page, and there we go. So this tutorial has only taken me about 12 hours to make because of all the issues we had with packages. It's been a complete nightmare. So hopefully it was useful for you, and we will reap the benefit of that moving forward. So I definitely don't want to stop this tutorial series. It is very useful, even though maybe Django with Graph isn't the most robust at the moment. I think it's very useful to learn some of these different techniques. So again, hopefully you did enjoy this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.